They said the sound of one slap destroyed $1 billion empire, but the truth is far more terrifying because the empire was already rotting long before anyone heard it crack. The piano stopped first. Then came the sharp clatter of crystal against marble. 50 wealthy guests inside Maison Riviera turned their heads at the exact same moment as Claire Whitmore stumbled backward beside table 12. One hand flying instinctively to her 8-month pregnant belly while red wine spread across the white floor like spilled ink. Her breathing caught in her throat. The baby kicked hard beneath her silk maternity dress. And across from her, billionaire investor Ethan Whitmore slowly lowered his hand as if nothing unusual had happened at all. "Sit down," he said quietly, straightening the cuff of his navy Tom Ford jacket. "You're embarrassing yourself." Nobody moved. Not the investors. Not the waitstaff. Not even the violinist near the balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The entire restaurant seemed trapped inside one frozen breath. Claire felt heat burning behind her eyes, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of Ethan's investors. Not again. She bent carefully to pick up her glasses from the marble floor, her swollen stomach making the movement awkward and painful. A soft gasp escaped her lips as pressure tightened across her lower back. Ethan leaned closer, smiling for the people around them, while his voice dropped low enough that only she could hear it. "If you ruin this dinner," he whispered, "you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Claire's fingers trembled around the bent frame of her glasses. 2 years ago Ethan used to kiss her forehead before every business dinner. 2 years ago he called her his lucky charm. Now he barely looked at her unless she disappointed him. "Ethan," she whispered carefully, trying to steady her breathing. The baby is fine," he snapped softly, still smiling for the table beside them. "Stop acting fragile." At the far end of the dining room, a waiter carrying a silver tray suddenly stopped walking. Tall. Broad shoulders. Calm expression. His dark suit looked too expensive for restaurant staff, and even from 30 feet away there was something strange about the way he watched the table. Focused. Controlled. Dangerous. Claire didn't notice him. Ethan did not notice him either. But several employees near the kitchen instantly straightened when they saw the waiter moving toward table 12. The ocean waves crashed softly against the cliffs outside the restaurant windows while candlelight flickered across polished gold decorations. Everything still looked beautiful. Elegant. Perfect. That was the terrifying thing about wealthy people, Claire had learned. Sometimes the ugliest moments happened in the prettiest rooms. Ethan reached for his wineglass again as if the entire restaurant hadn't just watched him humiliate his pregnant wife. "Smile," he muttered under his breath. "My investors are watching." Claire forced her shaking hands into her lap. Around her neck rested the small silver necklace her older brother had given her 15 years ago before she disappeared from her family's life forever. She touched it unconsciously now, a habit she didn't even realize she still had. The waiter's eyes dropped to the necklace for half a second. Then his expression changed completely. Cold recognition. Sharp disbelief. And for the first time that night, someone inside Maison Riviera looked at Claire Whitmore not like a billionaire's wife, but like family. Claire quickly lowered her hand from the necklace, unaware that the stranger across the room had just recognized the one detail she had spent 15 years trying to forget. Ethan lifted his wineglass toward the investors seated beside them and forced out a smooth laugh that sounded practiced and empty. "Pregnancy emotions," he said casually. "You gentlemen understand how dramatic things can get." A few uncomfortable chuckles answered him, but nobody looked relaxed anymore. The tension hanging over table 12 felt heavier than the ocean fog rolling against the restaurant windows outside. Claire adjusted her glasses carefully, trying to hide the tremor in her fingers. The baby shifted again beneath her dress, slow this time, almost restless. She pressed one hand against her stomach under the tablecloth and forced herself to breathe evenly. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold. Exhale. Dr. Reynolds had taught her that technique after her blood pressure spiked last month during another argument with Ethan. She still remembered the doctor's expression afterward. Concerned. Careful. Quiet. Stress affects more than just you now, the doctor had warned. Ethan hated when doctors spoke to Claire directly instead of through him. You are making everyone uncomfortable, Ethan murmured beside her without moving his smile. Do you have any idea how important tonight is? Claire stared down at the untouched sea bass on her plate. The smell suddenly made her nauseous. I said I was sorry, she whispered. You interrupted $1 billion acquisition dinner to argue about me missing another ultrasound appointment. His jaw tightened slightly. Because I was working. You promised you would be there. And you promised not to create scenes in public. The words landed harder than he intended. Claire fell silent immediately. Ethan noticed it too. For a moment guilt flickered across his face, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Men like Ethan Whitmore had spent too many years winning to tolerate discomfort for very long. At the other end of the room, the waiter continued approaching slowly with a silver tray balanced effortlessly in one hand. Every employee he passed seemed nervous now. One hostess nearly dropped a champagne flute after making eye contact with him. Still, the man said nothing. He simply watched Claire with growing intensity, as if piecing together a memory buried years beneath anger and distance. Ethan finally noticed him when the waiter stopped directly beside their table. You're 18-year McAllen, sir, the waiter said calmly. His voice was deep, controlled, almost emotionless. Ethan barely glanced up. About time. The waiter placed the glass beside Ethan with perfect precision, but instead of stepping away, his attention shifted toward Claire. Up close, the resemblance was impossible to ignore. The same blue-gray eyes. The same sharp cheekbones. The same small scar near the chin. Claire looked up slowly, confusion crossing her exhausted face. The waiter's expression softened for the first time. Claire? He asked quietly. The single word drained all color from her face. Ethan frowned immediately. Do you know my wife? Silence stretched across the table. Claire stared at the man standing beside her, as if she had seen a ghost walk out of the ocean. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. The waiter looked older now. Harder. Stronger. The boy she remembered had disappeared years ago. But those eyes had not changed. Lucas? She whispered. Ethan looked between them in disbelief. Wait. Lucas Bennett? Several nearby diners suddenly turned toward the table after hearing the name. Even the investors beside Ethan exchanged uneasy glances. In New York financial circles, the Bennett family name carried weight that made politicians nervous and banks cooperative. Claire's breathing became shallow. 15 years vanished inside one terrifying heartbeat. She remembered the screaming match with her father. The headlines after she ran away with Ethan at 21. The phone calls she ignored from her brother for months until eventually they stopped coming completely. She had convinced herself none of them wanted her anymore. Lucas studied her face carefully, and what he saw there nearly shattered the calm expression he had spent years mastering. The dark circles beneath her eyes. The way she flinched every time Ethan moved. The exhaustion she could no longer hide beneath expensive makeup and designer dresses. This was not the fearless younger sister who once climbed onto the roof of their Connecticut mansion to watch meteor showers wrapped in blankets beside him. This woman looked tired. Cornered. Small. Ethan suddenly laughed under his breath, though the sound carried uncertainty now. Well, he said awkwardly. This is unexpected. Lucas slowly straightened his posture. The warmth disappeared from his face entirely. Yes, he said quietly while looking directly at Ethan Whitmore. I think it is. The silence around table 12 no longer felt awkward. It felt dangerous. Ethan slowly set down his whiskey glass while trying to recover the confident expression that usually controlled every room he entered, but something had already shifted inside Maison Riviera. The investors seated nearby were watching too carefully now. Phones had quietly disappeared beneath tablecloths. Conversations had stopped entirely. Everyone in the restaurant understood one thing at the exact same moment. Ethan Whitmore had just humiliated a pregnant woman in front of a man powerful enough to matter. Claire could barely breathe. Her heart hammered painfully against her ribs as she stared at Lucas across the candlelit table. 15 years. 15 birthdays missed. 15 Christmas mornings spent pretending she did not think about home. The last time she saw her brother, he had been standing outside Union Station in New York rain, begging her not to leave with Ethan. She still remembered his exact words. "You are confusing charm for character." At 21 years old, she thought he was jealous, controlling, overprotective. She had chosen Ethan anyway. Now she sat trembling inside a 5-star restaurant, wondering when exactly her marriage had started feeling like something she needed to survive instead of cherish. Lucas noticed the exhaustion in her eyes immediately. He also noticed the way Ethan's hand remained possessively close to her chair, as if controlling her movement had become second nature. Billionaires built fortunes by reading people quickly, and Lucas Bennett had spent the last decade becoming one of the most feared private equity investors on the East Coast. He recognized pressure when he saw it. He recognized fear even faster. Ethan cleared his throat and forced a smile toward the surrounding tables. "Small world," he said lightly. "Claire never mentioned her family owned hospitality properties." Lucas finally looked away from Claire and turned his full attention toward Ethan. The temperature around the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. "That is because Claire stopped speaking to her family after she married you," Lucas replied calmly. Ethan laughed once under his breath, though nobody joined him. "Well, families are complicated." "Not really." Lucas's voice stayed even. "Some people protect the people they love. Others do not." Claire lowered her eyes immediately. Ethan noticed the reaction, and his jaw tightened again. For years he had controlled conversations by controlling tone. Charm when necessary. Silence when useful. Anger when challenged. But Lucas was not reacting the way other people usually did around wealth and pressure. He was too calm. Too composed. That unsettled Ethan more than shouting ever could. Across the room, the restaurant manager suddenly hurried toward them, nervous sweat visible beneath the collar of his expensive suit. "Mr. Bennett," the manager said carefully, almost breathless. "The board members arrived early for the upstairs meeting. They are waiting in the private lounge." Several investors near Ethan instantly looked up at the name. One man nearly choked on his drink. Ethan's expression changed for the first time that night. Real confusion. Real concern. "Board members?" he repeated slowly. The manager blinked as if surprised Ethan did not already know. "For Bennett International Holdings, sir." Silence crashed over the table again. Claire looked up sharply toward her brother. Ethan stared at Lucas in disbelief. Bennett International Holdings was not simply wealthy. It owned hotels in 12 countries, luxury real estate across Manhattan, private resorts in California, and one of the largest hospitality investment funds in the United States. Financial magazines called Lucas Bennett the ghost billionaire because he almost never appeared publicly despite controlling billions in assets. Ethan had spent years trying unsuccessfully to secure investment partnerships with Bennett Properties. And tonight he had mistaken the owner for restaurant staff. Lucas adjusted the cuff of his black sleeve calmly. A platinum watch flashed briefly beneath the light. Ethan recognized it instantly. Limited edition Patek Philippe. $400,000. Not a waiter's salary. Claire suddenly remembered something Ethan said months earlier during an argument over finances. "Your family stopped matching the moment you left them." At the time she believed him. Sitting here now, she realized the cruelest lies are usually the ones spoken softly enough to sound believable. Ethan straightened in his chair, trying desperately to recover control. "Lucas," he began carefully. "Whatever you think you saw tonight, I saw enough." The words were quiet. That made them worse. Claire felt her stomach tighten painfully again. Lucas immediately noticed her discomfort before Ethan did. "You are pale," he said, his voice softening slightly toward her. "Have you seen your doctor this week?" Ethan answered first. "She is fine." Lucas never looked away from Claire. I did not ask you. The investors at the next table exchanged another nervous glance. One woman discreetly stood and moved farther away from the growing tension near table 12. Ethan leaned back slowly, irritation breaking through his polished image again. You disappear for 15 years and suddenly you want to play protective brother? Claire closed her eyes briefly. Wrong move. The moment the words left Ethan's mouth, Lucas's expression hardened completely. No, he said quietly. I came downstairs tonight to inspect one of my restaurants. He paused for one long second while looking directly at Claire's trembling hands. Protecting my sister just became the reason I stayed. Claire suddenly pushed her chair back as another sharp pressure tightened across her stomach. The room tilted slightly. Lucas moved instantly toward her, but Ethan grabbed her wrist first. We are leaving, Ethan said through clenched teeth, still trying to save face in front of the investors. Claire winced quietly. Then Lucas stepped closer, his voice calm enough to terrify everyone at the table. Take your hand off her, he said. Upstairs, the private elevator doors opened, and 3 Bennett board members walked into the dining room at the exact worst possible moment. The moment Lucas spoke, the entire restaurant seemed to stop breathing again. Ethan slowly released Claire's wrist, but not because he wanted to. He released it because 3 people in tailored black suits had just stepped out of the private elevator upstairs, and every employee inside Maison Riviera instantly straightened the second they appeared. Claire recognized one of them immediately from financial magazines. Margaret Ellis, Chief Legal Counsel for Bennett International Holdings. Behind her stood Robert King, the company's senior investment director, a man famous for negotiating billion-dollar hotel acquisitions without ever raising his voice. The third board member, an older silver-haired man named Daniel Mercer, looked directly at Lucas and nodded once with quiet respect. Not fear. Respect. Ethan noticed that detail too. And suddenly the restaurant no longer felt like his territory. Mr. Bennett, Margaret said calmly as she approached the table. The Tokyo investors are waiting upstairs. Ethan's face lost color almost instantly. Tokyo investors. His chest tightened. 2 weeks ago, Whitmore Capital had submitted a proposal to partner with Bennett International on a luxury resort expansion outside San Diego. It was the biggest deal of Ethan's career. The acquisition alone was worth nearly $800 million. He had spent months preparing presentations, arranging financing, charming board members, and positioning himself as the perfect strategic partner. And now he realized the man standing beside Claire controlled the entire decision. Lucas barely glanced toward the board members. His attention remained fixed on his sister. Call Dr. Reynolds, he said quietly to Margaret. Now. Claire blinked in confusion. How do you know my doctor? Lucas finally looked at her directly again, and for the first time the cold billionaire mask cracked slightly around the edges. Because after you disappeared from the family, I still kept track of whether you were safe. Claire stared at him speechless. Ethan quickly stepped forward before she could respond. This has become completely unnecessary, he interrupted with forced confidence. Claire is emotional tonight, that is all. Lucas turned slowly toward him. You humiliated a pregnant woman in public. I lost my temper for 1 second. Interesting. Lucas's voice remained calm. Because your wife flinched before you even moved. Silence. Ethan opened his mouth but nothing came out immediately. Around them, several diners were pretending not to listen while clearly hearing every word. Phones rested face down on tablecloths now, but tiny recording lights blinked beneath expensive handbags and folded jackets. In the age of social media, powerful men no longer feared private mistakes. They feared witnesses. Claire pressed one hand against her stomach again as another wave of discomfort rolled through her lower back. Lucas noticed immediately. Ethan did not. You are in pain, Lucas said softly. I am fine, Claire whispered automatically. The words came out too quickly. Too rehearsed. Lucas's expression darkened. No, he replied gently. You are not. For a moment Claire looked dangerously close to crying, and that terrified her more than anything else happening inside the restaurant. She had spent years training herself not to break in public. Wealthy circles were ruthless toward emotional women. Ethan especially hated tears because they interrupted the perfect image he sold to investors and magazines. "Claire," Ethan said sharply under his breath, "we are leaving right now." Lucas stepped between them before Claire could even stand. Not aggressively. Calmly. Controlled. Somehow that made it far more intimidating. "No," Lucas said. Ethan laughed once in disbelief. "Excuse me? You are not taking her anywhere until a doctor checks her. That is my wife." Lucas's eyes hardened instantly. "And she is my sister." Upstairs, thunder rolled faintly across the Pacific coastline outside the restaurant windows. Rain began tapping softly against the glass. The atmosphere inside Maison Riviera felt suffocating now, charged with the kind of tension that changed lives permanently. Margaret Ellis returned moments later holding a phone. "Dr. Reynolds is on the line," she said quietly. Lucas handed the phone directly to Claire. "Tell her exactly how you feel." Ethan's patience finally cracked. "This is insane," he snapped. "You disappear for 15 years and suddenly act like some hero?" Lucas looked at him without emotion. "No, Ethan." His voice dropped lower. Colder. "Heroes arrive before damage happens." Ethan froze. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Claire slowly lifted the phone toward her ear with trembling fingers while the baby shifted again beneath her dress. Somewhere deep inside her chest, something unfamiliar began to surface for the first time in years. Not safety. Not happiness. Something much smaller. More fragile. Hope. And Ethan Whitmore realized with growing horror that the control he spent years building over his wife was beginning to slip away in front of everyone watching. Claire held the phone against her ear while rain streaked across the towering glass windows of Maison Riviera, turning the Pacific coastline outside into a blur of silver and black. Dr. Reynolds's calm voice filtered softly through the speaker. "Claire, I need you to tell me honestly if you are having contractions." Claire hesitated. Ethan immediately stepped closer. "She is overwhelmed," he interrupted. "This entire situation has become dramatic for no reason." Lucas slowly turned his head toward Ethan again. "You keep answering questions directed at your wife," he said quietly. "That should concern you." Ethan's jaw tightened hard enough for the muscle to twitch visibly beneath his skin. For years people in his world obeyed his tone before they obeyed his words. Executives lowered their voices around him. Employees apologized when he entered rooms. Investors laughed at jokes that were not funny because Whitmore Capital controlled too much money for honesty to feel safe. But Lucas Bennett was not reacting like anyone Ethan had ever dealt with before. He was dismantling Ethan's authority piece by piece without raising his voice once. Claire swallowed carefully. "There has been pressure in my lower back," she admitted softly into the phone. "And my stomach tightened twice tonight." Dr. Reynolds paused. "I want you to go to St. Mary's immediately." Ethan exhaled sharply in frustration. "This is unbelievable." Claire closed her eyes briefly. Even now, embarrassment arrived faster than concern. She hated that about herself. Somewhere over the years she had learned to apologize for needing help. Lucas noticed it instantly. "Margaret," he said calmly, "have my driver bring the car around." Ethan stepped forward again. "Claire is going home with me." Nobody moved. That terrified Ethan more than anything else that night. Employees throughout the restaurant suddenly seemed loyal to Lucas instead of intimidated by Ethan. The manager stood frozen beside the wine station waiting silently for instructions from Bennett International. Investors at nearby tables were openly watching now. One man discreetly checked financial news on his phone as if already calculating how quickly tonight could become public scandal. Because that was the thing about wealthy circles. Reputations did not collapse all at once. They cracked quietly first. Then everyone rushed away from the sound. Claire slowly lowered the phone from her ear. Her hand trembled visibly. Lucas noticed before anyone else, and gently took the phone from her fingers so she would not have to keep holding it. The simple kindness nearly broke her. Ethan saw the reaction too, and something ugly flashed behind his eyes. Not jealousy exactly. Fear. Real fear. "You are turning my wife against me," Ethan said coldly. Lucas stared at him for one long second. "No," he replied. "I think you handled that yourself." Silence crashed over the table again. Claire looked down immediately, but not before Lucas caught the expression crossing her face. Shame. Not for Ethan. For herself. That made something inside him turn dangerously cold. 15 years ago Claire Bennett had been fearless. She raced sailboats off the Connecticut coast at 16. Argued with professors at Columbia before she was 20. Once punched a paparazzi photographer's camera into a fountain after he insulted their mother outside a gala. Now she apologized for existing too loudly. Lucas suddenly understood something horrifying. Whatever happened inside this marriage had not happened overnight. It had happened slowly. Quietly. One comment at a time. One humiliation disguised as correction. One apology forced into her mouth until eventually she forgot she deserved better. Ethan loosened his tie sharply, frustration finally cracking through his polished billionaire image. "You do not know anything about our marriage." "I know enough." Lucas's voice remained calm. "I know my sister used to look people in the eye when she spoke." Ethan laughed bitterly. "You think money makes you morally superior?" Lucas glanced briefly around the restaurant. "No. But it does let me remove dangerous people from places they no longer belong." Ethan froze. The meaning hit instantly. Across the room, two senior investors from Whitmore Capital had quietly stood from their table. Neither looked at Ethan as they walked toward the exit. Phones buzzed throughout the restaurant almost simultaneously. News traveled fast among billionaires. Faster when fear became involved. Margaret Ellis stepped beside Lucas again holding a tablet. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but her eyes shifted briefly toward Ethan before returning to Lucas. "The Tokyo Group postponed the upstairs meeting," she said carefully. "They would like additional time to reevaluate the Whitmore proposal." Ethan's face went completely still. That was the moment Claire finally understood what was happening. Tonight was not just embarrassing for Ethan. It was becoming expensive. Very expensive. Lucas slipped one hand gently beneath Claire's elbow to steady her as she slowly stood from the chair. "Come on," he said quietly. "I am taking you to the hospital." Claire looked up at him with uncertain eyes. "Lucas." Her voice cracked softly. 15 years of distance sat inside that single word. Lucas's expression softened for the first time all night. "You do not have to do this alone anymore." And for the first time in years, Claire believed someone. Rain hammered against the black town car as it pulled away from Maison Riviera, leaving behind the glowing restaurant windows and the stunned silence of everyone still watching Ethan Whitmore stand alone beside table 12. Claire sat quietly in the back seat beside Lucas, one hand resting protectively over her stomach while city lights blurred across the rain-soaked glass outside. Neither of them spoke for almost 2 full minutes. The silence felt unfamiliar. Not uncomfortable. Just heavy with 15 years of things left unsaid. Lucas finally loosened his tie and looked toward her carefully. "How long has he been treating you like that?" Claire stared out the window. "Lucas, do not lie to protect him." His voice stayed calm, but she heard the strain beneath it now. Claire swallowed hard. It was not always bad. The answer told him everything. Lucas leaned back slowly against the leather seat and closed his eyes for one brief second. Somewhere inside him anger was becoming something colder and far more dangerous. Calculation. "Did he ever stop you from contacting us?" he asked quietly. Claire hesitated too long. Lucas noticed immediately. "Claire." She looked down at her wedding ring. "He said the family hated him. He said Dad blamed him for me leaving." Lucas let out a slow breath through his nose. "Dad called private investigators in 3 countries trying to find you after you disappeared." Claire's head snapped toward him. What? Every birthday he still had a gift delivered to your old Manhattan apartment even after you moved. Her eyes widened slowly in disbelief. Lucas looked out at the rain falling over downtown Los Angeles. He died 3 years ago. The words hit her harder than anything else that night. Claire's face drained of color. No. Lucas nodded once. Heart attack. Claire covered her mouth instantly as tears filled her eyes. Why did nobody tell me? Lucas stared at her for a long moment before answering carefully. Because every phone number we had for you stopped working. Silence swallowed the car again. Claire suddenly remembered all the times Ethan insisted they move apartments quickly after arguments. The phone plans changed. Email addresses replaced. New assistants screening calls before they reached her. At the time it felt controlling but manageable. Sitting here now, pieces were fitting together in ways that made her stomach turn. He told me nobody cared anymore, she whispered. Lucas looked at her gently. That was never true. The city skyline glowed ahead through sheets of rain while the driver merged onto the freeway towards St. Mary's Medical Center. Claire wiped beneath her eyes carefully, trying not to smudge her makeup completely. I should have called, she said softly. After Mom's funeral. After everything. Her voice broke. I was embarrassed. Lucas frowned slightly. Embarrassed of what? Claire laughed bitterly under her breath. Of becoming exactly what you warned me about. Lucas studied her face quietly. No, he said after a moment. You became isolated. There is a difference. Claire looked away immediately because hearing kindness felt almost unbearable now. Her phone suddenly buzzed inside her purse. Ethan. 3 missed calls already. Then another message appeared across the screen. We need to discuss tonight privately before this gets worse. Lucas glanced briefly at the notification. His expression hardened instantly. Do not answer him. Claire hesitated. If I ignore him, he will get angry. The second the words left her mouth, the atmosphere inside the car changed completely. Lucas turned slowly toward her. You are afraid of your husband. It was not a question. Claire opened her mouth to deny it automatically, then stopped. Because for the first time in years someone had said the truth out loud. Another message flashed across her phone before she could respond. You embarrassed me in front of investors tonight. Lucas held out his hand calmly. Give me the phone. Claire stared at him uncertainly for 1 second before finally placing it in his palm. Lucas read the message silently. Then another arrived immediately afterward. If Bennett thinks he can interfere in our marriage, he is making a mistake. Lucas smiled faintly at the screen, but there was nothing warm about the expression. Interesting, he murmured. Claire looked at him nervously. What? Lucas locked the phone and handed it back to her. Your husband still thinks this is about pride. Outside, thunder rolled again across the dark California sky. The driver exited towards St. Mary's as emergency lights glowed ahead through the rain. Lucas adjusted his cuffs slowly, his expression turning colder with every passing second. Because men like Ethan Whitmore only understood 2 things in life: power and consequences. And tonight, for the very first time, Ethan had finally met someone capable of giving him both. St. Mary's Medical Center smelled like rain, coffee, and antiseptic when the elevator doors opened onto the maternity floor at 11:42 p.m. Claire sat quietly on the examination bed while a fetal monitor traced soft rhythmic sounds through the room like distant horse beats. Her daughter's heartbeat. Strong. Steady. Alive. For the first time all night, some of the panic inside her chest began to loosen. Dr. Reynolds adjusted the monitor carefully and gave Claire a reassuring smile. The baby looks healthy, she said softly. But your blood pressure is too high again. Claire nodded without speaking. Lucas stood near the window overlooking downtown Los Angeles, one hand in his pocket while rain slid across the glass behind him. Even in silence, he seemed completely in control of the room. Dr. Reynolds glanced between them curiously. Your brother has already arranged a private maternity nurse and security downstairs. Claire blinked. Security? Lucas answered calmly before the doctor could. Precaution. Claire frowned slightly. Lucas, Ethan is not dangerous. The second she said it, Dr. Reynolds looked away awkwardly. Lucas noticed immediately. You disagree? He asked the doctor quietly. Dr. Reynolds hesitated. I think prolonged emotional stress can become dangerous during pregnancy. Lucas nodded once. Thank you for being honest. Claire suddenly felt exhausted. Completely exhausted. She leaned back against the pillows and closed her eyes for a second while memories flooded through her mind in painful flashes. Ethan canceling appointments. Ethan criticizing her weight gain. Ethan telling her she was too emotional to understand business decisions. Tiny moments. Quiet moments. Each one small enough to excuse by itself. Together they formed something much darker. Her phone buzzed again on the bedside table. This time it was not Ethan. It was a financial news alert. Whitmore Capital shares dropped 6% following investor concerns over Bennett partnership. Claire stared at the headlines silently. 6%. In one night. Another notification appeared almost immediately beneath it. Anonymous footage from Maison Riviera reportedly circulating among private investors. Her stomach tightened instantly. Lucas, she whispered. He looked toward her calmly. You released the footage? No, then who did? Lucas's expression remained unreadable. People with money record everything. Especially when another wealthy man loses control in public. Claire looked down at the screen again as fear mixed strangely with relief. Ethan cared about image more than anything. More than kindness. More than honesty. Maybe even more than love. And tonight that image had cracked in front of exactly the wrong audience. A quiet knock interrupted the room. Margaret Ellis stepped inside holding a folder against her chest. Sorry to interrupt, she said carefully. But this cannot wait. Lucas took the folder from her hand without speaking. Claire watched his expression change slowly as he opened it. Colder. Sharper. Dangerous. What is it? She asked nervously. Lucas looked at her for a long moment before answering. Our legal team started reviewing Whitmore Capital after tonight. Claire's pulse quickened instantly. Lucas, you deserve to know the truth. He handed her several printed pages from the folder. Bank transfers. Property agreements. Corporate filings. Claire stared at the documents in confusion until one line suddenly froze the blood in her veins. Psychiatric evaluation recommendation following childbirth. Ethan Whitmore listed as primary petitioner. Claire looked up in horror. What is this? Lucas's voice remained terrifyingly calm. 3 months ago your husband met privately with a specialist connected to one of Whitmore Capital's board members. Claire shook her head immediately. No, the recommendation suggests temporary psychiatric observation after delivery due to emotional instability during pregnancy. Her hands started trembling violently now. That is not possible. Lucas's eyes never left her face. The paperwork also grants Ethan temporary control over all shared financial accounts during evaluation. Silence swallowed the hospital room completely. Even Dr. Reynolds looked stunned. Claire suddenly remembered every moment Ethan called her emotional in front of other people. Every time he joked about hormones during dinners. Every argument where he suggested she was forgetting things or overreacting. Not random. Strategic. Carefully built. Slowly. Quietly. Like someone laying tracks toward a destination she never saw coming. He was preparing to take my baby, she whispered. Lucas did not answer. Immediately, because the truth was somehow even worse than that. Finally he spoke softly. He was preparing to make sure nobody believed you afterward. Claire stared down at the documents in her lap, while tears rolled silently across her cheeks. Not dramatic tears. Not loud ones. The kind that come when reality finally becomes impossible to deny. Lucas stepped closer beside the hospital bed. Claire. She looked up slowly. I am going to fix this. Outside, the storm continued hammering against the city while emergency lights flashed red and blue across wet Los Angeles streets below. And somewhere inside a luxury penthouse overlooking the same storm, Ethan Whitmore still believed he was fighting to save his reputation. He had no idea he was about to lose far more than that. By sunrise, the story had already escaped the walls of Maison Riviera. Financial blogs called it an investor relations disaster. Social media called it something else entirely. The video of Ethan Whitmore humiliating his pregnant wife inside a luxury restaurant had spread across private networks overnight before finally leaking publicly just after 6 in the morning. Millions watched the clip in silence. The expensive dining room. The shattered wineglass. Claire lowering herself carefully to pick up her glasses while visibly pregnant. Ethan's cold expression afterward. But the moment people replayed most was not the confrontation. It was the second camera angle showing Lucas Bennett stepping forward the instant Claire looked afraid. By 8:30 a.m., Whitmore Capital stock had dropped another 14%. By 9:15, two major banks suspended negotiations tied to Ethan's San Diego resort expansion. And by 10 o'clock, every major financial outlet in New York wanted a statement from Bennett International Holdings. Claire sat quietly beside the hospital window wearing one of St. Mary's pale blue maternity robes, while morning sunlight slowly replaced the storm outside. She looked exhausted. Fragile. But different now. Like someone waking up after years underwater. A soft knock came at the hospital door before Margaret Ellis stepped inside carrying coffee and a tablet. "You should probably see this," she said carefully. Claire frowned slightly as Margaret handed over the screen. The headline nearly stopped her breathing. Bennett International withdraws all negotiations with Whitmore Capital effective immediately. Beneath it sat a public statement from Lucas himself. Bennett International Holdings does not conduct business with individuals whose private conduct demonstrates instability, intimidation, or disregard for family safety. Claire stared at the statement silently. Ethan would understand exactly what it meant. In wealthy circles, that kind of language was corporate execution. Lucas entered the room moments later, his expression unreadable as always. "The board voted unanimously," he said simply. "Whitmore Capital lost the contract." Claire looked up slowly. "Lucas, that deal was worth almost $1 billion. I know. Ethan will never forgive this." Lucas walked toward the hospital window beside her. "Good." The single word hung heavily in the room. Claire lowered her eyes again. Somewhere deep down, part of her still felt guilty watching Ethan lose everything he spent years building. Lucas noticed it instantly. "You are still trying to protect him." Claire gave a weak shake of her head. I keep wondering if I ignored too many signs." Lucas leaned against the window quietly. Manipulation only works when it happens slowly. Claire thought about that for a long moment. The criticism disguised as concern. The isolation disguised as privacy. The humiliation disguised as stress. Every small moment that trained her to doubt herself instead of him. Her phone suddenly buzzed against the bedside table. "Ethan." Again. This time there was no anger in the message. Only panic. "Claire, please answer me. We can fix this together." Another message appeared seconds later. "Do not let your brother destroy our family." Claire stared at the screen silently while the baby shifted beneath her robe. Family. The word suddenly felt different now. Clearer somehow. Lucas glanced briefly toward the phone before looking back out over the city skyline. "You know what the worst part is?" he said quietly. Claire looked up. "Ethan still thinks this is about money." Downstairs, reporters had already gathered outside St. Mary's after learning Claire Whitmore had been admitted overnight. Security blocked elevators. Hospital administrators whispered nervously through hallways. Somewhere in Manhattan, investment firms were already distancing themselves from Whitmore Capital before the damage spread further. Ethan's empire was not collapsing because Lucas attacked it. It was collapsing because people finally saw the man behind it clearly. Claire slowly reached for her phone. For one long second Lucas thought she might answer Ethan's call after all. Instead, she opened her settings menu quietly and blocked his number completely. Lucas said nothing. He simply watched his younger sister inhale slowly for what looked like the first real breath she had taken in years. Tears filled Claire's eyes again, but these felt different from the ones she cried last night. Not fear. Grief. Relief. Freedom arriving all at once. Outside the hospital window, the storm clouds had finally broken apart over Los Angeles, revealing bright California sunlight stretching across the city below. Claire rested one hand over her stomach and whispered softly to her unborn daughter, "You are going to grow up knowing what kindness looks like." Lucas turned toward her then, and for the first time since that terrible night at Maison Riviera, he smiled. Not the cold billionaire smile investors feared. A brother's smile. Quiet. Protective. Certain. Because some men spend their entire lives building fortunes while destroying the people who love them. And sometimes all it takes to expose them is one crowded room, one frightened woman, and one person willing to finally say enough.